And Greg, have you given me host as well?
Hold on, I think I gave it to the wrong person.
Well, while we get that set up, I'm going to get this going. Everybody seeing the cover page?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's get started. Thanks everybody for joining this evening. You may recall last month, Dave Stern and I compared the ASI Air and Nina. And we said they were two different applications for two different purposes. But most of the time that we spent, we were showing how the two tools handled comparable tasks. I mentioned Nina's breadth in terms of the kinds of equipment it's capable of managing, its automation capabilities, but we weren't able to get into detail on that because we didn't have time. You know, as I think about the ASI Air, which I do not use, it reminds me a lot of the iPhone. It is simple, elegant, and it does very well everything that it is designed to do. But what it's not is a professional mirrorless camera. And I think the analogy is actually pretty good because both the Air and the iPhone, you think of the camera, are very user-friendly. You take a Canon R6 out of the box and you can probably figure out how to turn it on and maybe set it to program mode and push the shutter and take a picture. But it's got pages of menus after menus after menus, and it can be a little intimidating to learn how to use it. At the same time, once you've spent a little bit of time learning the basics of the camera and where things are, you start to be able to take advantage of the power of the tool. And Nina is very much the same way. There's more to learn than with the Air, but it can do a great deal more than the Air, and including running a fully automated remote observatory if you so choose to put it to that. So tonight we're going to show you how powerful and flexible Nina is, and we're going to organize the talk around imaging use cases. So I want you to think of it from sort of a simple to the most advanced, taking individual frames, running what Nina calls the legacy or simple sequencer, to the heart of Nina's power, the advanced sequencer, which is not hard to use, as we're going to show you, and we're going to demonstrate it live. But there's almost no limit on how powerful that tool can be. So my fellow speakers are Doug Summers, Alan Rockowitz, and Craig Harding. Both Doug and Craig came to Nina from other applications, and over the course of the talk, they'll say a few words about why they made the switch and what is it about Nina that appeals to them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig, and I'm going to stop sharing. You can see what Craig's going to talk about generally, but Craig, why don't you go ahead and share and take it away?
In this, in this section, really what I'm going to talk about is the initial startup of Nina, what you see. Hang on, I'm getting to sharing right now. And what some of the power is right away. So the first thing when you come in, well, actually, it drops you into way up at the equipment level to see what your equipment is, and you can walk through that. But where I want to spend some time right here is talking about the idea of profiles and what that means for you. So this really fits mostly with people that have multiple scopes, multiple cameras, and possibly even multiple mounts. For me, I've got two AM5s and one GEM 45, and I've got 4 different scopes going from really wide field and FMA, ASCAR FMA 230 all the way up to my biggest is a 9.25 Celestron. So profiles really makes it easy to identify what each one of these setups consist of. And more important than that, once you've set up a profile, you can configure everything about that setup. So, for example, in this 94 EDP8 Sharp Star, I've got focal length, focal ratio, what mount I'm using it with, the camera. Um, I actually use some manual filters. Here's my filter list, and the reason I do this is when I save my files, I include the filter name in it. So when I go back later on, I know what the heck it was shot with. Um, there's setup on autofocus. All this follows a profile. So for each scope, I've got a little bit different step size, autofocus step size. And you can even set up, again, for each of them, a focus offset for different filters. Now, this comes into play for you people that are using filter wheels. When you change from one to another, it'll automatically change the focus based on your offset. But there's a lot you can do specific to a complete setup. I skip over dome imaging, also meridian flip. So depending on your tripod, your scope length, you might have different meridian flip settings so that it doesn't. I've got some things that would never hit, and I've got other things that are long enough that I've got to be worried about it. So I set up a different meridian flip for each of those setups, and that's really kind of the beauty of what Profiles does for you when you're running multiple setups. You can also create, if I go back to options, I've even got one that's just completely a simulator. There's nothing attached to it. It is simply, well, I'll switch to it. I got to disconnect from my existing equipment and load the simulator. And all this consists of is simulator camera, uh, uh, simulator focuser, and it'll run you can almost run a sequence through most of this. So you can set up and test things with it. The other thing that is a side benefit from having some of these profiles, when you do know you want to set up a plan for a scope, and I'll go back to the 94 again. I'm not even connected right now to any of the gear. I just pulled up the profile, but I can still go in to, I just got sorry about that. I just got a text box that popped up that I don't think was for me. I can go in and I got to get rid of an image thing. Hang on, there's some things on my screen that are overlapping. All right, so I can go in and actually look for items, set them for framing, and Jeff is going to go into this in more detail, but I'm not even hooked up to any of my equipment. And I'm only pointing this out as this is something that you can't do with like an ASI Air. I can't actually set up a plan ahead of time, frame it, save it off, put it in a sequence that I'm going to run later on. I can do this anytime without the equipment attached.
Craig,
So
let me add, if I may, you don't even have to have a simulator profile. I can
no,
be,
I just pulled up my actual scope profile, but I didn't connect to
yeah,
anything.
yeah,
So
this is a totally
it's
offline tool.
yes, exactly. So you can do setup ahead of time for, given nights, create objects that you want to image, and then, when the night comes, all you got to do is run it. And I think that's really the most I wanted to mention about profiles and getting into one of the features of Nina that I find interesting, which is being able to plan ahead of time.
Hey,
Well,
Craig, we can
while
go
you're
back-
there, Craig, why don't you just quickly go to the equipment and point out the different categories of equipment that Nina is capable of managing.
Okay, and I'll connect to my devices so that it becomes, you know, you can actually see data in there. So, and I think Doug is touching on this a little bit, but, and Doug, tell me if I'm stepping on your toes of what you're going to cover.
It's all right. We can, a little redundancy is okay.
Okay. So, you know, cameras obviously, and you can set up some initial cooling parameters. A filter wheel, I've got a manual filter wheel. So I just select what filter I'm doing so I can record it into my file names. Focuser, I use almost all my gear is ASI or ZWO gear. But one of the things, you know, I find Nina, what interested me in Nina is I'm not stuck to ASI equipment. You know, I've been waiting for the rotator to come out for a long time, and it's imminent. You know, every month it's kind of imminent for the last 2 years, and I might get a different rotator. I don't know, but I can select one, and I can even use uh, have it tell me how to rotate it by using a manual rotator. Mounts, you know, you can a wide variety of ASCOM mounts. So as long as it's got an ASCOM driver, which every mount does, you can use any mount with this. Guider, I don't know what else Nina would use, but it uses PhD2 as the guider. So, you know, and again, this information here sticks with the profile. So for each profile, I have a little bit different dither settings based on what the guide scope is going to be, and you know, to get the right amount of movement. You can set up switches. I don't have any switch, but this would be like the Pegasus switch. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
Flat panels. This is one of the things I'm considering with Nina, is eventually getting to a flip-a-flat, you know, an automated flat panel that you can have close the scope up and take flats after an imaging session. Kind of attracted to that. Weather, I'm hooked up to open weather. So it'll give you weather. And I think, if I understand it, with the safety monitor below, it's kind of designed to hook up to other stuff, but I think I can actually make it run off of my weather interface. I haven't tried that yet. I don't really worry about that too much. And then, you know, if you go big time, hooking up a dome to it or a roll-off roof. So that's the equipment that is available.
Thanks, Craig.
All right. I'm going to unshare. I don't have anything else on the screen.
Okay, then I'm going to reshare.
It's not letting me get to it though.
You're doing, Chuck.
All right,
What are you doing over there?
my screen is back.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to talk about choosing and framing a target. This is a topic we talked about a bit in the meeting last month. But what I'll show you is a little video on this is taken from my system when it was set up live. On the Sky Atlas, which is highlighted here, you've got a variety of little triangles. You touch them, they rotate downward, and you can search based on all these different parameters. So we're going to search for M45. Click the search button, M45 comes up. Oops. Pause. There we are. So when you have a target, and if you were searching for galaxies or something, or clusters, you might have many targets listed here. You can add it to your sequence. You can set it for the framing assistant, or you can slew directly to it. We're going to set it for the framing assistant. So we click that button, and now we are over at framing. It takes a few more seconds than the video suggests for the image to load. Data like this that you see here and that you've seen on the previous screens, all of this is populated directly from the ASCOM drivers for the gear. You don't have to put this stuff in. It knows what my camera parameters are. My focal length, as Craig said, that's a manual thing. So you've got rotation. You can set up mosaics here, multiple panels. And here I've just, I'm tweaking the rotation a little bit, get it, drag around a little bit. And then wherever you put the box, you can then save it. In this case, I'm going to add it to my target list. And it tells me it's irreversible because I overwrote an old target. That is, I spend a lot of time in the framing assistant, trying to get things just the way that I want it. And then once you've saved an item in your target list, you can go back to it night after night, and the telescope, you've got to get the rotation right, manually or automatically, but you can go back to exactly the same spot again and again, and you can save targets even though you haven't run them yet. So you save 10 targets and then just go through the targets subsequently to image them. So now, Doug, we turn it over to you. Talk about the imaging dashboard.
Okay, so I'll tell you when to launch the thing, but just go ahead and flip the slide. So the first time I saw the Nina default GUI, which we call the kind of the dashboard here, I wasn't very impressed, and it wasn't until I realized that you have a tremendous amount of flexibility, both in where you position widgets on the display, what color schemes you use. You've got a primary and an alternate, and this is one example. This is taken from Jeff's customization of the user GUI. Flip the slide. This is my own customization, and although there are, they have a similar look and feel, there's actually quite a bit of difference between them. So what I'd like to do is do a canned demo. I'll speak over that demo and walk you through what it's like to go through the dashboard and what you see. I think seeing is believing. And so go ahead, Jeff, to the next slide, and you can launch.
Just say stop and go. Right?
Okay, I think we're just going to go through it. I think it should be all right.
All right, here we go.
Okay, so this is my Nina icon on my small PC. I'm just going to launch that. And as Craig pointed out, here's the profiles. I'm going to go ahead and you can see that I've got several profiles just like Craig does. For this demo, I'm going to pick the home simulators and we're going to load up that profile. And then I'm going to come into the user GUI. It's going to take just a moment to initialize, and you'll see on the bottom left, it says initializing plugins. And now I'm in the main GUI. For whatever reason, Nina starts us in the equipment profile with the camera. Okay, and so I don't like that, but it's okay. It's all right. Now, Craig mentioned all the different equipment types, and so we can go down. I canned this before I knew he was going to do that, but I'm not dwelling on any of these particular items. So we're back to the equipment profile. And now these other menus we've either already talked about or we're going to talk about. And so, but I'm going to spend time talking about the imaging GUI, which is where you're going to spend almost all your time once this thing is going. And so here, this profile sets up kind of with equipment on the left, vertically, and you can see my mount, camera, focuser, and weather. And then you've got the imaging section in the middle, okay, with some of its own tabs. I've got the guider on the bottom, and on the top, that horizontal bar, these are all widgets that you can turn on or off. They fall in the equipment and information category. And on the right-hand side, you've got some additional tools that can be turned on or off on this GUI as well. And you can see the blue ones are the ones I've got turned on. Now, on the very right is the imaging control button. And you can see I just popped that up. Okay, I'm going to turn it back off. And down in the lower section here where the cursor was, I'm going to turn on the autofocus. So it's kind of nice to be able to turn these things on and off and have them only when you need them. So in order to kind of get a better feel for this, I'm going to turn on, you've got a connect button for everything, okay, all your devices at once. And I'm going to go ahead and turn those on. And hopefully, if everything goes well, you should see when you start your equipment that you'll get a bunch of success messages. And if you don't, you'll get some failure messages. And then you can deal with them one by one in the equipment GUI. I'm going to park that simulator. And now you can see I've got some filled in equipment information, including controls for the equipment where they're available. So now I'm going to talk about, moving the GUIs around. This thing is very flexible, so I can not only can I change the sizes of these GUIs and kind of how big and fat they are, but I can also take and I can move widgets wherever I want to. And these little controls that are popping up allow me to drop these widgets anywhere I want, including if I want to make tabs in those existing positions. So pretty flexible where you can park this. Now, I'm not going to do this because I happen to like my equipment all on the left, okay? But you get the idea, I hope, of how that is set up. So now I want to talk about, let's see, I'm not done talking about the configuration. Here we got tabs on the image display, and these are also positionable. You can change these if you want, but I've got a scope control down here that'll allow me to change the scope position. I've got a 3-point polar alignment. And again, these are kind of situational. So it's nice having tabs there so that you can have only what you want to see when you want to see it. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about controlling equipment just via the GUI. So I've got the imaging GUI control up, and I'm going to set this to 10 seconds so that we can see it. And I'm just going to push the go button. And now if you look on the bottom left, you'll see that we're imaging, okay? You'll always have a status of what Nina's doing on the bottom left, and we're exposing. And after it gets done, my image pops up in the center. And you can do all the things that you would expect to do. You can, pan and zoom. And in fact, you've got a bunch of controls on the top of the screen there for rotations and mirroring and zoom controls and what have you. And so all of that stuff is pretty straightforward. Now, if I wanted to, I could turn on looping. Okay, so I could turn on looping. I could save the images if I wanted. Here we go. And I could change to a target name, and I could run all of my imaging right through this imaging GUI, and I'd be able to watch them as they went. Now, I'm not going to do that here, but you get the idea. I also have a scope control, and so you can tell right now that the tracking is stopped, and I can start the tracking. You'll see now I'm in sidereal mode, and I have a slew command down here for RA-dec or Alt-Az, and for this trivial demo, I'm going to do an Alt-Az slew to 30 degrees and 120 azimuth, and then I'll just slew the telescope, and you can see I get a command, I get a status indicator up here saying I'm slewing, and then when I'm there, I've reached the position, I'm good to go. Okay, so you could do this with your GUI. You can do it with your guider as well. You'd be doing it externally, but you get the idea that I can control the whole thing without any sequencing by just doing those kinds of controls. So to finish the story, when I'm done, I might want to stop the tracking, of course, and park the telescope, and you can go and see on the left-hand side that it's slewing to the park position. And then when I'm all done, I can just disconnect my equipment and then kill the GUI, and that's a complete, it takes a moment in this demo. I don't know why. It doesn't take that long typically to actually shut off your equipment, but for the demo it did. And then I could go up and kill the GUI on the top right, and we're done. So that's not an exhaustive look, but it gives you kind of a feel for the look and feel of the GUI. And again, you can change the colors however you like. So, I think this is a pretty flexible GUI, and this is one of the things that drew me to Nina and kept me there. All right, so that's all I have for this. You can move on, Jeff, if you want.
All right, so now we turn it over to Alan, who's going to tell us about something called plugins on the Nina platform.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about plugins a little bit. So first of all, the very first slide is, plugins, what are they and how do I use them? So what is a plugin? A plugin, so basically Nina comes with some great basic functionality, but plugins are really for specific use cases, like the scope control that Doug showed is a plugin. The 3-point polar alignment is a plugin. So things like that. So honestly, some of them I use all the time, and some of them I use once every 6 months or so. But they're always there if I need them. So, and they're really, really, really small files, as Jeff pointed out to me today. Like on the order of like 15 or 20K. They're just like 5 or 10 lines of code. They're really small files. So if we want to go to the next slide,
Oops,
whoops.
all right, Butterfingers.
Okay, so I have 4 must-haves for my plugins, and everybody's a little bit different. And just like if we just go back a little bit to the GUI discussion, that GUI is kind of infinitely customizable. A couple of things that Doug didn't mention, probably because he didn't have time. Number one, if you get it all screwed up like I've done many times, there is a way to just say, okay, start over. And there is also a way, once you get it the way you like it, to save that configuration. So every time it's just going to always restore to that. So those are kind of nice things with the GUI. Because I've personally, I'm a Mac guy, and I found the GUI a little confusing with moving window panes and getting them to stick where you want them. And I've produced some really atrocious results. And I said, okay, let's start over. And there's a way to just restart, with the default GUI. So anyway, these are I have four plugins that I consider must-haves. And, I think Doug kind of agrees. Scope control. So I think if we go to the next slide, oh, actually, so this next slide I'm just showing, so at the bottom left, there's a little red square that just shows that plugins is highlighted, and the little 1 means I had one that needed an update. Okay. So at the top of the screen there, you'll see a little square. It says, installed. So those are the plugins that I personally have installed on my machine. So you'll see the ones I talked about, plus a couple others, or Bucculum is in there. I use that one every time. I'll explain that one a little bit. Scope control is always there. Sequencer power-ups, I think Doug knows a lot more about that than I do. It gives you really fine control over stuff. So that's why I like sequencer power-ups. 3-point polar alignment is there all the way at the bottom. And I guess it sorts it by it's alphabetical order, so it doesn't really matter. And I have the 10 micron controls at the top, or the 10 micron tools plugin, because I have a 10 micron mount. If you go to the next screen, Jeff, you'll see. So here's a list of, I couldn't even fit a list of all the plugins, but there's one for if you have an astrophysics mount. Astrophysics tools is the 4th one down there. So, I mean, I think Doug has that one installed. I don't know if he's ever used it. Jeff has that one installed, but there are a bunch, like exoplanets is in that list. I actually have that one installed. So Nina is really intended for deep sky stuff. Exoplanets adds the planets and comets, so you can find that stuff as well. It's really a long, exhaustive list, and the developers are pretty open to suggestions. So if you say, I wish I had one that could do X, you just tell them about it, and somebody's typically going to come up with one. A couple of things I wanted to point out on this page. Updating the plugins is a really trivial process. There are a couple of ways to do it. At the top right corner, where Jeff's got the cursor now, you can just click on the update button. And typically, I mean, 100% of the time, I've never had it not happen where you just restart the program. It says requires restart. And sometimes if I'm not going to be using the plugin, I just won't restart it. I'll just wait for the next time it'll be updated. Also at the top of the column of the list of names, it says, 3-point polar alignment. It shows the little down arrow in the, I guess that's a filing thing. I forget what they're called, the filing drawer. So, that's another way to update it. And then at the bottom, you'll always have the box where you can just click update all, and it'll just update all of them. So if you have 4 or 5, if that one is a 4 or 5, you can just click update all. It'll just update all of them. Just restart it, and you're ready to roll. Couple of nice things on this page. So I have 3-point polar alignment. It says the author on the right in the main panel is Stefan Berg on this one, and he's kind of the main author of Nina. So honestly, I just trust him the most. His plugins tend to be really, really the best. It also has a little description of what the heck this plugin does, and if there are changes, he has got links to a change log and the homepage of his up at the top also, version number, etc. So because this is a screenshot, we can't scroll, but there's a lot more to the description, and there are a lot more plugins than are shown here. It only goes up to P, but there's still plenty more. So I think I covered everything on this slide. If we want to go to the next one, Jeff. So here I just have the, scope control is like I discussed. That's a big one that I use. Also by Stefan Berg. And you'll see on a screen, there's not much to the user interface on this plugin. But it's a really a requirement, honestly. And I made a suggestion to Stefan about this plugin, and he changed it and made it the way I wanted it. So that was great of him. I find that the developers are very responsive, but they also don't suffer fools. So you have to do your own research ahead of time and just don't ask stupid questions, is the bottom line. That's been my experience with these guys. And Stefan, he's in Germany, and he has said that's just the way Germans are. We just are very direct. So he'll just tell you if your idea is stupid, he'll just tell you that really doesn't make any sense. I would rethink that. So I've only had that experience once or twice, but I've had it. So I do my research before I ask questions. They have a Discord where you can ask questions. I mean, it's a free product and the support is great, so I really have no complaints. You can see from my list of plugins, I have Connector, which is great. And what Connector does is, Jeff can't click on it, but what it does is it just automatically connects your equipment, which sounds like it's not a big deal, but it'll automatically move your autofocuser to a certain position, because mine does change over the course of the night. So I want to start in the same place just about every night, depending on the temperature. As you know, the temperature varies widely here. It'll automatically connect your focuser, it'll automatically put your filter wheel to a certain filter. It'll automatically connect your mount, and it does other things. But again, it's there, and I don't call on it very much. It just works. It's just like every time I start up, it does its thing, and I don't have to worry about it. Horizon Creator is another one I have there. You'll see that's for, basically if you want to create a mask. So if you have to build a model, or you don't want to try to image something when it goes behind a tree, you'll build a mask so Nina will know not to go there. Light Bucket is, some of them are kind of fun. Jeff loves Remote Copy. It's a little too Windowsy for me. Doug might like it. Doug, have you ever used Remote Copy?
It's remote copy, but not from Nina.
Okay. So it's more of to me personally, I think it's a little bit of a programming thing. Doug's a programmer. Jeff said, no, you can just go with the defaults and it works great. So I guess I'll try it again. But again, I've installed plugins there that I've never used again. And, they're so small, they don't slow it down. They don't do anything really. They don't harm anything. So I think we can go to the next one, the next slide. And this is just Hocus Focus, which is another gotta have. It just speeds up the focusing. So if you have an autofocuser like I do, it just produces a beautiful curve. It gives you the Jeff, what was that term you told me earlier? I forget. That you were getting 0, the R squared value, right? It shows you
That for correlation.
the correlation between the curve fit uh, and the points that it gets when it runs autofocus. So ideally you want, 1.0. It goes, I've gone down to like 0.95 and it's still acceptable. Jeff was getting 0, so that's obviously not going to happen. So this is just the Hocus Pocus page again. The author is George Helios, and he's one of the original programmers too. He's been around forever, and you just get to know these guys just because, I've been using Nina since it really started. So he's been around forever. He's one of the brains behind the operation. Next, I think I have the another plugin page. Yeah, so this is the sequencer power-ups, and this one, I mean, maybe even Doug should describe the power of this plugin. But I mean, what I use it for is it really exposes, like, you might have a trigger, like where you want it to do a meridian flip. Well, it'll expose all the steps of the trigger, and you can stick in little messages in there about to flip the meridian. It'll push out a text to your phone, stuff like that. So that's how I use it. But it does a whole bunch of other stuff. Doug, you want to talk about sequencer power-ups?
Maybe I'll just say that in joking, the developer of this plugin once commented in the forum that Nina was going to be rewritten with the power of power-ups. So this is a kind of a coding interface that will allow you, it does a lot of things like extend the existing commands, but you could imagine a scenario where all of Nina gets rewritten via power-ups. And I think that's pretty funny and interesting. So
Yeah,
We'll
and he's
we'll
also
see it. We'll see it
pushing
in a
out
little
lots of
bit.
updates.
Don't be intimidated by this is a coding tool. I get scared by the word coding.
Yeah.
These nice little boxes that you drag into place, you change a variable. It just adds enormous power, which we'll show you in a little bit.
Yeah, I guess the key to remember is these are all options. So you don't ever have to even touch this. You don't have to learn how to code. I don't know how to code. I mean, I'm an electrical engineer by trade, but the last programming tool I used was Fortran 77. Doug's gonna laugh at that. And it was written in 1977, so that's how old it is. So that's the last time I really did any coding. And I'm a terrible coder, and I love the advanced sequencer. So, I get as far as programs that say hello world, and that's about it. Next, I think I have a nice slide for you. So the 3-point polar alignment. This is a great tool that I use. I think Doug uses it. Jeff said he's had some problems with it. It's also by Stefan Berg, so it's I think it's one of the prime plugins, and we all have to do polar alignment. It can be painful. He makes it really easy. Um, uh, there's the description, the author, the usual stuff there, and it goes a lot more. He tells you, I mean, you can't scroll down on this image, but he'll show you where it works great for, where what part of the sky you can polar align with great accuracy and what part not so much. So he's very honest about how it works. So before every imaging session, when I set up my mount every time, I should say, I do a polar alignment, right? And you use, we call it TPPA, 3-point polar alignment. And it's just really, really fast. And you don't have to me, the best part of it is you don't have to be able to see the pole. So if you can't see Polaris where you're set up, that's fine. You can just point it to a certain part of the sky, and it'll tell you to move it 3 times, and it takes pictures, and it'll tell you how to adjust your mount. Move it to the left or right, move it up or down. And then, once you tighten it down, you're all good. You're good to go. So next, so this is the 3-point polar alignment screen. So as you can probably see, the user interface looks very different from everybody else's because kind of everybody does their own thing with it. And this is the way I like it. So at the top in the larger rectangle, you'll see in the middle there, you've got a bunch of error messages because the camera wasn't connected and the filter wheel wasn't connected. You get all this stuff And you say like, why is that play button? Because you just hit play basically when you're ready to roll. You can ignore all the settings and just go with the defaults and just hit play. But you might say, well, why the heck is play not even highlighted there? Well, you get all those error messages and all those error messages that you have to clear out, and that'll tell you why. In the top right corner, I've got scope control. So if I'm not able to see the pole and I want to be able to move the telescope, I can just go over there and slew my mount a little bit. In the inside the big rectangle at the top, you'll see the little rectangle on the left side. And so start from current position. That's off, which means it's just going to start from Polaris, from the north, from the home position. But you can turn that on if I usually polar align at like 45 degrees azimuth and maybe 45 degrees altitude. And I'll just start from there and it works great. It'll say, okay, I took a picture now move the telescope, 90 degrees or something, and I'll take another picture and then it'll tell you how you have to move your mount. So this is the imaging tab that Doug talked about before. You see it says imaging all the way on the left, that's highlighted. But then I have the image, all the different tabs at the bottom, and I'm on 3-point polar alignment to activate this tool. One thing that Doug kind of glossed over, and just stop me if I'm giving you too much information, but on the right side at the bottom, what I like, and Doug had it also, but I think he had it bigger, you can actually see the sequence. So you don't ever have to leave this imaging tab. You can just sit there and just watch your sequence and watch it go by. And you'll see there's a little scroll bar there too as well. So go ahead, next. So I just wanted to point out, so the Orbiculum plugin that I use, if you're doing multiple targets, you might have a line in there like, it says loop while next target is below altitude 35 degrees. So I have a bunch of targets in here, and I'm just going to keep going on this target until the next target reaches a certain altitude. So that's why I love this plugin. It gives you a whole bunch of options like that. And the little I keep saying I, but it's an exclamation point in little red circles there. On the next screen, it'll show you, that means there's a problem, right? Well, I'm telling it to use a certain filter, and it's saying, I can't do that. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, why? Because the filter wheel is not connected. So it gives you a little error message. It's very helpful. They give you great tooltips to give you, hints because if you're not a programmer like me and you see that little circle with an exclamation point, you're like, okay, what the heck am I doing wrong? Well, it tells you what you're doing wrong. So I think that's kind of nice. I don't, Jeff, go ahead. I think that was my last slide though. Yeah.
Yep.
So let's move on and take it from here.
All right, Craig, I'm going to stop sharing. So now we're going to turn to the subject of automation for those of you who actually might enjoy getting some sleep at night. Craig, all yours.
All right. So I'm going to we're going to cover two different sequencers. One is what's called the legacy sequencer. It's pretty much identical to what you can do in the ASIR plan mode. And you'll see that in a moment. The other one that we'll cover in a little bit is the advanced sequencer. And for me, that's one of the big reasons I got into Nina, because it offers so much flexibility to run your plan the way you want to. I mean, you just saw Alan show you one of the things that is neat in our Orbiculum, where you can more finely define when you want to start the next object. But anyhow, that'll be covered in a little bit. So in this presentation, let me share. Got to turn on sharing. Okay. I've got to get one thing off the screen that's in my way. So I'm just going to start in the Sky Atlas. I'm not really going to talk about what you do here because we've kind of covered that before. But, I pulled up M31. I could go to Framing Assistant, but for this, I don't need to. I'm just going to add it to the legacy sequencer. So it drops it in to the legacy sequencer. This is the one I'm saying is pretty much just like the ASI Air. You know, you can, uh, before you start doing any of your sequence, you can turn on the camera cooling, unpark the mount, you know, say, yeah, I do want to do meridian flips. When it's all over, you can set, you know, your options. Do you want to park it, warm the camera? Down here is actually for this object. And this is this kind of really considers one shot color in this example, but you can, I don't, you can, if you've got a rotator, you can make it automatically rotate the target the way you had it framed, center the target, start guiding. You set up how many, you know, how many images you want to take. Let's say 100, whoops, 100, 180 seconds. Whoops, got a key right, 180 seconds. It's going to fill in the filter unless I want to select a different one. But it normally just fills in the current one, whether I want to dither, how many frames I want to dither. And one of the nice things is autofocus within Nina has got a lot more options than in the ASI Air. The one that's added that I like, and I don't know that I'd say a lot more, but after HFR change. So you can say when the star size changes by more than 10%, I want it to run, or whatever percent you want to put in here, I want it to run a new autofocus. So obviously, you know, when I start, I could refocus after a certain number of minutes, and you can do exactly what you want here. I think in the Air, it's like 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours for timing. But if you want 45 minutes in there, after so many exposures, after the temp changes, so you can turn any of those on and off. And that's for a specific target. All this stuff down here is specific to this target. And if I want to add another target, I just go back to the Sky Atlas, and I'm just going to, for this, pull up M45. Again, send it to the legacy sequencer, boom, it's in there. Make any changes I want for that. Once I've got those set up, it's set up to, you know, do M31 and then go to M45. I just click run, and it will run until completed. Very much like the ASI Air, you don't have much control over when you actually want to change from M31 to M45. You know, as you're doing multiple objects, it's kind of limited in that way. I find that an issue with the ASI Air. I set up a plan, but frequently I have to stop it in the middle because I've not been able to precisely figure out how long a dither is going to take tonight based on scene conditions and how many autofocus runs are going to run and things like that. So invariably, whatever number of exposures I take, I determine, kind of trying to take in that into account. I have to stop a run and make some changes. One nice thing though in the legacy sequencer and in the advanced sequencer is while it's running, I can actually go in here instead of stopping it. I can just go in and change how many images I want it to take on the active item that's running. You don't have to stop anything. So I find that very helpful just to be able to make on-the-fly changes. And I think, and if you're doing, so this is taking into account thinking it's a one-shot color, but if you're doing mono, you can add however many filters you want to it, the exposure times you want, how many exposures. So it will handle all of that. I don't have anything else really to mention here. I just wanted to show if, because at first Nina kind of looks a little daunting, but just to get started, this is an easy way to get started. It's simple to pick objects, drop them in here. The Sky Atlas shows up really nicely, and just click the run button down below and you're off and running.
All
I
right.
don't have any, I don't have
Thanks,
anything
Craig.
else. Yes?
So now we're going to come back to Doug, and we're going to begin to introduce the advanced sequencer.
I'll just give a quick introduction before I do this, because we've been moving, if you've been paying attention, we've been moving upwards in complexity. We started with the GUI and manual controls. Now we've gone to sort of a GUI-based sequencer. And what people discover is that if you have specific things that you want to do that don't fit well in the box that you're given, you may want to be able to sort of create your own instructions. And so we're going to take a view now of the advanced sequencer, and specifically the instructions-based sequencing that you can do with the advanced sequencer. I'm going to start simple, and then Craig is going to come back and give you a more powerful example. So go ahead and push the go button. And we're back in my screen now, okay, where, we've got the standard GUI, but now I'm going to turn on this widget up on the top there, okay, that is the sequencer. And when we do that, you're going to see that on the right-hand side, I've got a new sequence over here, and it's empty. It's blank at the moment. It's got start, a targeting information, and end. And I could go down and just launch this thing, except it's empty, okay? So we need to know how to fill in instructions there. And so we're going to click on the sequencer tab on the left-hand side, and now you see the advanced sequencer. And it's got three areas, a start area, a targeting area, and an end area. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build, up the sequence. I can save it, okay? I can load it. I can save it and load it. I can delete it, and I can even reset it on the fly if I want to. But it's all instruction based. And so everything is going to be an instruction, and they're going to be categorized, okay, according to the kinds of devices you have. So for instance, and I'm not showing you all of the commands, I'm just showing you some, but like in camera, you might imagine cooling it and warming it. In the focuser, you can imagine wanting to do an autofocus. Under the telescope, you could imagine doing finding home, parking, tracking, slewing, and unparking, so on and so forth. And even under utilities, you might want to do something like wait for conditions. Okay, so there's lots of individual commands that are instructions. And now I just want to go through and I'm going to show you how to build one of these things. We're just going to drag and drop. Okay, so I'm going to make a trivial example of a sequence. So we're going to start by unparking the telescope. And of course, if we unpark it to begin with, well, we probably want to park it to end our adventure. All right, and then let's see, we might want to do something in the middle. Yeah, like let's slew, okay, the telescope. And hopefully we're going to grab one of those here and drop it in the middle section. Okay, and now, well, let's make it a little more interesting. We might want to cool our camera in the beginning before we get going. And of course, if we're cooling it, we might want to uncool it, okay, at the end. And now we need to do some real work. We probably want to image. So we want to take some exposures and throw them in here. And I'm just doing a trivial example here. So I'm going to go ahead and change my, my slew to just be 20 degrees and an azimuth of 130. And by the way, Alan, I put these examples in because that's where I go to polar align. So, all right. So we're getting close now. All right. Maybe one more thing we could do just to make it, the last interesting thing is maybe we want to turn the tracking on, okay, at the begin. And when we want to make sure the rate is sidereal. And then when we go to end our adventure, we want to make sure that that the scope is not tracking anymore. And so we'll turn the tracking off. And you've got to pull down here that we can stop, right, this thing. So this here is my trivial example, okay? Oh, one last thing we want to do. We better say how many exposures we want to take, right? I'm going to take 15 exposures of 3 seconds each. And I could do this again. I could just build up a more and more complication. But this, I wanted to show you just a trivial example of instruction-based sequencing. Now, I could start this thing right from here in the sequencer tab, but I'm not going to do that. I could save it and reuse it, but I'm just going to come back over instead into my imaging tab. And now when you see on the right-hand side, I'm actually got my sequences showing up, okay? And so now if I start it, I'll get a pop-up that gives me some information. It says, hey, do you need to take care of anything? And I can take care of whatever it wants me to. And I started it, and you can see the status bar now. The mount is slewing. Okay, you can see down where the arrow is. And you've got status on the right-hand side showing you as it's going what it's doing. And it'll just go and go to its heart's desire. So with every image that's taken, now I've got my imaging history showing up. And I can hover over those if I want. I can pull them up, but this is generally where you're going to spend a lot of your time, right? You'll have a sequence going, you'll be imaging, and you'll just watch the images come in. You'll look at the HFR values. If there happened to be a problem or something like that, and you needed to stop and do an autofocus, for instance, or something like that, you could stop it. You could go ahead and stop this. Let's see here. We're at 11 of 15. And so I could, if I had a long sequence going, I might want to come over and stop it for a moment, make some adjustment, whatever adjustment I wanted to make. And then if I restart it, it'll pick up where I left off. Okay, so now I'm at 13 of 15, and I continue until I'm done with my imaging. And then it'll go into the end game. And it turned my tracking off, and it's in the middle of parking the scope. You can see that on the status, either for the mount or for the status bar on the bottom. And I did have a couple problems here because the warming the camera and cooling the camera, since I'm in the simulator, right, I don't have that capability. And so it just ignored those commands, even though they were in there. Now, later I could go and I could double click on any of these and pull up the image in the image viewer, see, whatever I wanted to see in there. But, this is generally speaking how you would do a very simple instruction-based sequence. So the question now is, how do we go from the trivial to the more complex? And I think Craig is going to take us there. So I'm
Actually,
done.
Yeah.
we called an audible, and I'm going to do that.
Oh, okay, great.
So let me reshare. Oops, I got to jump over here. All right, now if all is going well, you should see a gray screen. Do you?
No.
There it
Oh,
is.
now we do.
There it is. Okay. So, if you were going to drag and drop all those instructions, and Doug's image compressed a whole bunch of them. When you think of all the other steps you need to add to have a reasonable amount of, or to get everything done that needs to be done at night, you're going to be dragging and dropping a lot. Nina provides you with templates that allow you to perform in a single group a variety of tasks. So I can create a full-blown sequence, 3 drag and drops. Start with basic sequence startup, which I'm going to drop in the startup area. Basic sequence target, which I'm going to put in the target area. I'm going to scroll down here below that. And I'm going to put the basic sequence end down here. Now, what have we got here? At the startup, we're going to cool the camera. We're going to unpark the scope. Now, we need a target. Notice that there is no target here. I told you before how I can save targets. So I go over to my save targets. They're organized by relevance or by name. So M37, whatever target I want, I drag and drop it. Transits around midnight. I change my mind. I want the flaming star. That's fine too. Now, notice the dark gray boxes. These are called blocks. Things within the block are related only to that block. And there are, we've talked about instructions, but in truth, there are really three types of instruction. And we can see those right down here. There are triggers, which is an instruction that does something when a condition is met, like meridian flip, autofocus based on a temperature change. These are all going to be triggered by some event that Nina is tracking. Loop conditions, as you might imagine, say keep doing something over and over and over again until the loop condition ends. And then there are the instructions that simply say do something. Take a picture, move the telescope, unpark the telescope, change to sidereal, change to king rate, whatever it may be. So now we get into the targeting section. Well, we're going to slew, center, and rotate. We're going to run the autofocus. We're going to begin guiding. Now we're imaging the target. Here, these are triggers, remember. So we have a meridian flip trigger, and that's configured separately in Nina. So Nina knows when the mount gets to a certain point, when it has to, when the window opens for a meridian flip and when it closes. Autofocus after HFR increase, these are variable. You can change these to whatever you want. Autofocus after a filter change. There are 5 or 6 other autofocus triggers. You can set up loop conditions in this particular program. Dithering is also a trigger. And again, notice this is the actual exposure box. So this trigger, dither after exposures, does not affect anything in the boxes outside of it, but everything in a bigger box affects subordinate blocks. So the autofocus after HFR increase does affect this block here. Here's our loop condition. We're going to loop for 20 iterations of the following instructions. Switch the filter to current, which it'll overlook if it's unchanging, and then take a 300-second exposure. And then when all the pictures have been taken, just like with Doug's example, warm the camera and park the scope. Now, that was just created with the most basic default tools that are out of the box with Nina. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to show you a current sequence of mine, which has grown up the same way as a tree grows. Every time I would learn some interesting new tool, I would add it to my sequence. And so this is what it has turned into. This is a sequence I actually used last weekend. Takes a moment to come up. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I use some of the sequencer power-ups in the most basic way possible. One of the concepts of power-ups is it introduces constants and variables. So imagine you're doing 3 different targets, LRGB, SHO on all the targets. You're going to have a lot of different exposure boxes because you have a separate command for exposing for each filter. And you're going to have all kinds of parameters, exposure time, number of images, and so on, that you have to keep repeating. And if you ever decide to make a change, you have to go through the whole program and change it in every place. Well, I group a whole bunch of constants, and I've got some variables up here. I set my RGB gain at 50, my narrowband gain at 100. I've got how many images I'm going to take. My narrowband count is 3, my luminance count is 15, my RGB count is 2, exposure times. If I ever, and then I use these words instead of the numbers in the imaging commands. If I ever decide I want to go from 300 to 600 for my narrowband exposure, I just overtype it right there. And then that will automatically populate it everywhere. So that's just an example. Variables, I start off, my Focuster starts off around between 41 and 42,000. This is my starting position. I keep track of how many autofocuses I do a night. I start at 0, and at various places, it resets this variable to variable +1. So at the end of the night, it can say you did 9 autofocuses. just take a little bit. You remember the target section we saw a moment ago. So here is the target that I shot the other night. It's a nice little box here with exposure information. Shows you how many HA, LR, GB images I've taken so far. Center on drift allows you, as the evening goes on, if you move off the center of the frame after a certain number of pixels, it will automatically reset. So that's a trigger. And restore guiding. You have clouds, your guider goes kaflooey. It will constantly try to restore guiding, and when the cloud passes, you'll be back in business. So what do? I start off by preparing my target. I've already got some things where I've cooled the camera, I've set the focuser, I've got an astrophysics mount, I've built my model, I'm ready to go. RoboCopy, which was alluded to before, is simply the Microsoft Xcopy tool with a nice shell on it. I store my images in D:// subframes on my local mount side PC, and over the network, it automatically transmits them to the desktop that is sitting next to me. So in the morning, I don't have to carry a little memory card in the house and then copy gigs of material over. They're all here. Here you can see where I've reset a variable to iterate an autofocus. There is a tool that Alan has, but he didn't talk about it, called Ground Station, which is a messaging tool. I use a free tool called Pushover. It sends messages to my phone. So when it reaches this point in the program, I get a message titled Show Imaging that says, starts now. You can populate this with error messages, whatever you want. One of the things that's particularly nice, my imaging block is now set up. Here's Show, and here's LRGB. I don't take LRGB SHO on every target every night. If I'm doing just a show target at a given night, there's an on-off button. Boom, I've turned off LRGB for that target. But the commands are all here in my template, so that when I come back the next night, I don't have to rebuild an LRGB target, turn that one on and turn off the show one, and I've got the different parameters for that. So I think at this point, we're over time. We could go on. You can see I've got multiple targets. This particular night, I had 3 different targets. These blocks essentially repeat what you've seen up here. And then at the very end of the night, I have a close up, move the focuser to 0, warm the camera, park the scope, and after 2 minutes, shut down RoboCopy and send me a message saying tonight's session is done. So to wrap up, I'm going to jump back. How do you learn about Nina? Very quickly. And these are hyperlinked. You can get the deck afterwards. There is the Nina Discord channel that was talked about. YouTube has, here are 4 good resources, particularly Patriot Astro. He has created a whole bunch of templates that you can use as starting points for narrowband, OSC, with a rotator, without a rotator. That's where I began, and then I have just customized my sequences as I go. Quiv the Lazy Geek is another one of the Nina programmers. He was involved in a variety of the parts of it. He's got some great videos. View into Space, Sasha Wies from Switzerland, has tools, videos on using Nina, and Visible Dark, Sean Nielsen. And then I also invite you to talk to any of us who are using Nina. That's what our group is for. So with that, we're happy to stick around for questions, recognizing that we are over time, and we thank you for your patience and attention. Questions?
I just have one quick question. When you're slewing to your first target, do you have something similar? I saw it as an option. It's called solve and sync, or plate solve and sync. I know astrophysics uses
Yes.
that.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
So you start off, you have something that generates a plate solve before you get going?
Yeah, so it does it. I slew to a 60 degrees up in the eastern sky, which for me is nice open view. I autofocus. And then anytime it does an autofocus, you can have it sync the plate solve and sync the position to your mount.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I didn't want to take too much time.
I have a question. About connecting devices, this program is obviously running on a PC and not some little controller. What do the devices connect to? Are they all, there's USB or some kind of ports on the devices. They all have their own wires to a PC, or how do you handle that?
Doug, you want to start?
Yeah, it can be slightly different. So for the scope, for instance, you may have your own scope control program that has its own software. PhD, for instance, is external to the program, but is interfaced to it. ASCOM, most of the devices are going to be ASCOM driven. And so if your device can speak ASCOM, it can speak to Nina.
But I'm talking about wires.
But in terms of for wires, I've got a Pegasus power box. My computer connects to the power box. The power box connects to the guider and the camera and the autofocuser, and everything runs through there.
And so the connection to the
little
PC
Melee PC, and it's got 4 USB ports on it. It doesn't have any power ports, but it's basically mounted on my scope. It's about the size of a cell phone in terms of footprint, and about, if you take your cell phone and lay 3 of them, 2 or 3 of them that thick, it's very small. Fanless. And mine's got 16 gig of memory and 512 gig of storage. So it's sitting right now. It's sitting out on my scope, and I just connect everything to it USB, and then I'm connected. I'm inside connected to it through a remote desktop on my computer, and I can run that off of my tablet. Most of the time when I'm actually imaging, I'm using my tablet to look at what's going on, because I've pre-planned it and I'm just running it and monitoring what's going on, maybe making a few changes. But you can run it from your tablet pretty easily.
Craig, do you use an iPad?
No, I use Android.
So I've got an iPad, and there is an RDP, Windows Remote Desktop Protocol program or app for the iPad.
And it's free, by
I'd
the
say
way.
it's slightly kludgy, but it works. Sometimes I've started the whole program off my iPhone because I happen to be out there and my phone's in my pocket.
And I can tell you this as a comparison, my Melee PC Wi-Fi is much stronger than my ASI Air Wi-Fi. I rarely get disconnects. Me trying to do this with my ASI Air on the telescope would have been kind of real janky, showing any kind of screens, because I wouldn't know when it would disconnect and need to reconnect. And it's just a little more stable.
Any other questions?
Well, I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'm going to put those on the TAA forum tomorrow and let you guys chew on them. So too many to cover tonight. But yeah, thank you for that in-depth look at things. Answered a lot of questions for me, and I'm sure it did for a lot of others as well. Again, I would recommend that if you are interested in getting into Nina, that you take advantage of what Jeff just offered and post your questions to the TAA forum, and these guys are all on there most of the time, and they're happy to share their wealth of information with you. Don't forget.
We may want to have some of those questions posted on the Discord so that we don't really perturb the rest of TAAA. It's just something to think about. Maybe you might seed your question with a forum question, and then be prepared to switch over to Discord for the more deeper answers so that we don't drag everyone into the mud with us.
Oh, drag them in. I don't care. The, our next meeting will be in the new year on January the 20th. So I look forward to having everybody come back then. We'll try to get back on track with the beginner's corner and some image sharing at that time. So since we've gone pretty long tonight, I'm gonna let us all stop at this point, and I'll see you next month.
Happy holidays all.
Yep.
Happy holidays.